Imagine waking up one morning and finding out that the money in your pocket, the one currency the entire world agreed to trust, is no longer the most important one. That hasn't happened yet, but the process that leads there has already begun. For 80 years, the US dollar has been the backbone of the global economy. Every oil deal, every trade agreement, every government reserve priced in dollars, settled in dollars, dependent on dollars. But something is shifting, quietly, slowly, and almost completely under the radar. In this video, we're going to trace the dollar's rise to absolute power and then watch, step by step, as the cracks begin to appear. We'll look at who's trying to replace it, what they're building, and, most importantly, what it means for you wherever you live in the world. This is the story of the quiet death of the US dollar. To understand why the dollar might fall, you first have to understand how it rose. The year is 1944. World War II is not yet over, but the Allied powers can already see the end coming. And they have a problem. The global economy is a disaster. Europe is destroyed. Trade has collapsed. Every country is using a different currency, and nobody trusts anybody else's money. So in July 1944, representatives from 44 countries gathered in a small town in New Hampshire called Bretton Woods. Their mission to rebuild the entire global financial system from scratch. The deal they made was elegant in its simplicity. Every country would peg their currency to the US dollar, and the US dollar in turn would be pegged to gold at a fixed rate of $35 per ounce. Why the dollar? Because America had won the war, its factories were intact, it held 2/3 of the world's gold reserves, and its economy was producing half of the entire world's industrial output. America was, without a question, the most powerful economy on Earth, and so the world made a bet. We'll all trust the dollar. This created something remarkable, a single currency that the entire world needed. If you wanted to buy oil from Saudi Arabia, you needed dollars. If you wanted to trade with Japan, you needed dollars. If you were a central bank holding reserves, you held dollars. The dollar wasn't just America's currency anymore, it was the world's currency. And then, in 1971, something went wrong. President Nixon made a dramatic announcement. The US was ending the gold standard. The dollar would no longer be convertible to gold. Many economists predicted this would end the dollar's dominance overnight. They were wrong, because Secretary of State Henry Kissinger flew to Saudi Arabia and made a new deal, a deal that would change everything. The terms were simple. Saudi Arabia would sell its oil exclusively in US dollars. In exchange, the United States would provide military protection and buy Saudi government bonds. The other OPEC nations followed. Almost overnight, the entire global oil trade, the single most important commodity on Earth, was locked to the dollar. You didn't need gold to make the dollar matter anymore. You needed oil, and oil came in one currency. The petrodollar system was born, and with it, the dollar's dominance became near unbreakable. For decades, the system worked beautifully. Countries held dollars, traded in dollars, and crucially trusted that their dollar holdings were safe. Then something changed. America began using the dollar as a weapon. First came the Iran sanctions, locking Iran out of the global financial system by cutting off its access to dollar transactions. Then Venezuela, then Russia. And in February 2022, when Russia invaded Ukraine, the United States and its allies did something that shocked the world. They froze $300 billion of Russian central bank reserves, money that Russia had legally earned and legally held. Now, whether you agree with that decision or not, it sent a message to every country in the world. Your dollar reserves are only safe as long as America likes you. And that changed the calculation for a lot of governments. There's another problem, a quieter one, but in some ways more dangerous. The United States national debt has crossed $34 trillion. That's more than the entire GDP of the US economy in a single year. For most of history, this didn't matter much because the world needed dollars. The US could borrow cheaply and endlessly. There was always a buyer, but that buyer is starting to pull back. China has been reducing its holdings of US Treasury bonds for years. Japan, America's largest foreign creditor, has been quietly selling. Even Saudi Arabia has been diversifying. The world is slowly, cautiously asking a question it never dared ask before. What if we don't need quite so many dollars? What started as an economic acronym coined by a Goldman Sachs analyst, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, has evolved into something much more ambitious. In August 2023, the BRICS nations held their most consequential summit ever. They admitted 6 new members: Saudi Arabia, UAE, Iran, Ethiopia, Egypt, and Argentina. Almost overnight, this bloc went from representing 26% of the global economy to nearly 37%, and their stated ambition to reduce dependence on the US dollar. They've talked about creating a new BRICS currency. They've pushed for settling trade in local currencies. They've built alternative payment systems that bypass the US dollar entirely. None of this has been fast. None of it has been easy. India and China, both BRICS members, have their own tensions. The bloc is far from unified, but the direction of travel is clear. China is the most serious challenger. For the past decade, Beijing has been methodically building the infrastructure needed for the yuan to function as a global currency. They built CIPS, the cross-border interbank payment system, a direct alternative to SWIFT, the Western-dominated network that processes dollar transactions. They launched the digital yuan, a state-backed digital currency that can be used for international trade without touching the dollar system at all. And through the Belt and Road Initiative, they've lent trillions to developing nations in yuan, creating a web of countries that now have economic reasons to use Chinese currency. But here's the thing. The yuan has a fundamental problem. China tightly controls its currency. You can't freely buy and sell yuan the way you can dollars or euros. Capital controls mean that foreign investors can't easily move money in and out of China. And trust, the invisible foundation of any reserve currency, is hard to build when the government can change the rules overnight. For now, the yuan is a regional challenger, not a global replacement. And then there's the moment that genuinely made markets nervous. In March 2023, Saudi Arabia announced it was open to selling oil in currencies other than the dollar, including the Chinese yuan. This is not a small thing. This is the cornerstone of the petrodollar system cracking for the first time in 50 years. Saudi Arabia hasn't abandoned the dollar, but the fact that it's even discussing alternatives, that is a signal. The relationship between America and Saudi Arabia that Henry Kissinger built in 1974 is no longer unconditional. The most likely scenario isn't one currency replacing another, it's fragmentation. Economists call it a multipolar currency world. Instead of one global reserve currency, you get several regional ones, each dominant in its own sphere. The dollar still runs the Americas and much of Europe. The euro deepens its role in European trade. The Indian rupee grows in South Asia and the Middle East. No single winner, no single loser, just a messier, slower, more complicated world. Something else is happening quietly in the background. Central banks, especially those of China, Russia, India, and Turkey, have been buying gold at the fastest pace in 50 years. In 2022 and 2023, central banks bought over 1,000 tons of gold per year. That's double the rate from a decade earlier. Why? Because gold is the one asset that no government can freeze. You can sanction a country's dollar reserves, you can lock it out of SWIFT, but you can't sanction physical gold sitting in a vault in Moscow or Beijing. Gold won't replace the dollar, but it's becoming the insurance policy that countries buy because they no longer fully trust the dollar-based system. Then there's the wild card. Over 130 countries are now actively researching or piloting central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, digital versions of their national currencies, programmable, traceable, and instant. China's digital yuan is the most advanced, but the US Federal Reserve is also studying a digital dollar. Europe has its digital euro project. India has launched one. The idea is seductive. In a world of digital currencies, cross-border payments could happen in seconds without needing a correspondent bank in New York, without touching the dollar system at all. Whether this future arrives in 5 years or 50 is anyone's guess, but the technology to bypass dollar infrastructure already exists. Here's the thing that every sensational headline about the dollar's death gets wrong. The dollar doesn't just survive because of politics or habit. It survives because of network effects, the same reason everyone uses WhatsApp even if a better app exists. More than 88% of all international currency transactions involve the dollar, on at least one side. The dollar makes up about 58% of global foreign exchange reserves. Most commodity contracts, oil, gold, wheat, copper, are priced in dollars. Changing all of that requires not just political will, but decades of infrastructure building, trust building, and coordination between hundreds of countries simultaneously. The euro has existed for 25 years. It still only represents about 20% of global reserves. That tells you how hard it is to shift. America also has the deepest, most liquid financial markets in the world. U.S. Treasury bonds are the closest thing to a risk-free asset that exists. When the world gets scared, in 2008, in 2020, even in 2022, money flows into dollars, not out of them. The dollar is losing ground, but losing ground slowly is not the same as dying. So what does all of this mean for you? Whether you're in India, Nigeria, Brazil, or America, the slow shift away from dollar dominance affects you in ways that are easy to miss. First, inflation. When the dollar weakens, commodities priced in dollars get more expensive for everyone.